you may be running 7,500 people or 10,000 people or 100,000 people, but you're not actually a leader unless you are inspiring them to follow and go where you're going. You are only a leader if people choose to follow you. We bet him that he couldn't get the words truculent badger into the interview, and it was very funny because he actually did it. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never done it before. It was slightly scary in some ways, but I just got on with it.
Welcome to the MD podcast with me, Martin Hartley, the Commercial Director for Imagine. We're a professional services consultancy specialising in high-value, low-population SMEs into the FS sector. Being a leader in the world's largest banking organisations is aspirational. However, few people make it to the top. The Imagine podcast will offer insightful, frank, and interesting discussions on the biggest issues facing directors and divisional leaders. The show aims to inspire and educate future leaders by telling the career stories of those of today. I can't wait for today's episode. I'm joined by Georgina Jarratt, Global Head of Transformation, Digital and Innovation at HSBC's Global Private Bank. Welcome, George. How are you?
I'm very well, Martin. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, as the listeners know, we look at the past, the present, and the future of your career. So that's the order we'll go into. We'll dive into a few projects that have, let's say, made you famous at HSBC, which is why I was looking forward to having you on the show. And then we'll obviously draw out the L&D aspects for the next future leaders coming through, and obviously we'll touch on your coaching and mentoree programs as well. So first and foremost, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
Oh, well, I didn't know you were going to ask me that. So I'm originally from Yorkshire. Those who work with me or know me both inside and outside work will very much realise and associate with that. We're very direct people in the north, by the way. We say it as it is. So I was born and brought up in Harrogate, which people from the north say is not the north because it's very posh. But anyway, It is indeed the north.
It is, but it's the posh north, right?
It is the posh north. So, I can do the Yorkshire accent, but, when I need to. So I was originally at state school in a little tiny place called Ripley, which is an interesting village that's built entirely as a replica of a French village, actually, medieval French village. So it's very pretty, tiny little school, 2 classrooms. And then from there, I was parcelled off to boarding school, lucky old me, in the Lake District in Windermere, nice. An all-girls boarding school for young ladies. I don't think it worked. Those who know me will know that maybe I'm not the world's most beautifully sort of brought up young lady. But anyway, so I was there actually from 10 to 17.
Okay.
So basically my entire school career. And from there, I left and went to Loughborough University after a year travelling around the world. So, yeah.
Excellent. I know Ripley well, believe it or not.
Do you?
And, yes, I do. I've got friends there, and the lakes is very dear to my family because my in-laws are from up that way. They're from North Lancashire, so we go up there quite
rains
a bit.
A lot. You see, everyone goes, "Oh, Windermere, it's lovely." It really rains when you live there the whole time, and it's very grey. But it can be beautiful. But
it does. Boarding school, it is. I think it's actually one of the most beautiful places in the world. And it's a bit of a hidden gem from a lot of people that are from abroad, but
it is.
We won't.
It's not quite so lovely when you're made to swim in the lake, which is a mile deep at the deepest point and absolutely freezing all year round. So it does rather ruin the Lake District for you when you're sent away to school there, it turns out. But yeah.
Boarding school is an interesting one though. So my father was in the military. We travelled around a lot. My uncle was the same, and my cousins went to international boarding school, and we chose not to. So I've kind of got a good insight into that and the pros and cons for it. I think one thing that comes out of it is really good network for people. And obviously there's got to be something in it about growing up and getting to understand yourself, which can draw out future leaders, I think. Is there any part of that you go back to your boarding school experience that you use today, or you think actually this shaped me?
I mean, look, my 2 children did not go to boarding school. I wouldn't have stopped them if they'd asked to. I don't have particularly firm views either way. I think the experience for me was exactly as you say, you grow up very fast. I'm not sure I fundamentally agree with sending children off to boarding school very young. I think the way we do boarding school now is much better because it's weekly boarding quite often. So you go for the week, you have all the fun bits, and then you can come home.
Yeah.
Whereas in my day, we would come home 3 times a term, 1 week for half term, 2 weekends for exeats. That was pretty brutal at 10 years old, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I have views on that. The upsides, you're absolutely right. My friends from school are literally my family because we grew up together. And in fact, the only place you could turn to when you had a problem was your friends, which is not necessarily the best way, because I think you sometimes need somebody older. So it definitely makes you more independent. When you leave school and then go to university, there's no problem with the transition at all. Whereas when you leave home and go to university, it's a bit more of a wrench. I don't know. I mean, certainly from a studying perspective at an all-girls boarding school, you know, you had to focus on work because there wasn't a lot else to focus on apart from swimming in the lake. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've had a lot of time to think about leadership, and I've asked a few experts whether leadership is nature or nurture. I suspect it's a bit of both, but I believe it's deeply in people's nature as to whether they're leaders or not, is my honest view. So whether it helped me from a leadership perspective, I don't know.
Yeah, I wholeheartely agree with you on the it's deep in your nature aspect. You learn things obviously and you get better at it, but you can see from sport, from business, where the natural leaders are and where the people that, you know, are excellent in their own right at what they do, but they're not natural leaders.
Yes, exactly.
So
there was a little anecdote for you there, Martin, which actually would be quite interesting. And in fact, I had lunch with the lady who gave me this expression, which I have used over and over and over again. She was our head of comms in global banking markets, and then in the private bank here, a lady called Emma Jane Varley, who is a very inspirational colleague and friend of mine. And she said, you are only a leader if people choose to follow you. And it's a very important point because it is a human choice as to whether people will follow you or not. You may be running 7,500 people or 10,000 people or 100,000 people, but you're not actually a leader unless you are inspiring them to follow and go where you're going. And it is an inspirational thing. It's literally a choice. They can do it because they're told and paid to do it, but that's to me, and indeed this was her expression, so I'm not stealing her thunder here, but you know, you're only a leader if they choose to go where you're going. And I think that's a very important point. So it's all about inspiring people to do what you're doing.
Yeah, completely. I massively agree with that, actually. It's a really good point. You mentioned there, obviously, you went to Loughborough University, good university, big sporting university. What was the choice there? And secondary question, bit of a loaded question here, but did go into boarding school give you a better insight into financial services and guide you down that route because the people were there, or was it just
totally unrelated? So Loughborough, excuse me, I'm sorry, I've had this cough for 4.5 weeks. It's not COVID, by the way. So forgive me for coughing a little bit. Loughborough was a really weird one because I'd done maths, further maths, physics, and art at school, which was a very weird combination of A-levels. Which would automatically tell you that I was going to be an architect, which was what I started to look at.
Okay.
Architecture was 5, maybe even 7, I think 5 years in those days, and there were absolutely no jobs. And somebody once said to me, do you walk around towns looking up at all the buildings? And I was like, no. And so they said, okay, then you shouldn't be an architect. It's very simple. So I was like, okay, good point. So my mum, went to some party somewhere and met somebody who did something called ergonomics, which nobody had heard of, by the way. We now vaguely know what ergonomics was. But I spent maybe 10 years saying ergonomics and people repeating economics and me eventually going, I can't be bothered to correct this because it's just too boring to keep on explaining what it is. So I did ergonomics at Loughborough, and Loughborough was the only university in the country that did that subject at that time. And actually, by accident rather than design, it suited me really well because it's human-computer interface design. We learned how to code, which in those days, because I'm exceptionally old, was quite a rare thing. We learned about physiology, anatomy, biology. It was a really well-rounded course, and I loved it. Having said that, coming from boarding school to Loughborough in those days, not quite so great because it was an exceptionally left-wing university, and people like me who turned up with a car were outright rejected on arrival with our very nasty boarding school outfits. So weirdly, I don't think I fitted in very well, but actually as a university and the course that I did was brilliant. Now, financial services was a total coincidence. I didn't go into financial services first. I went into consulting. Consulting, actually, it turns out with my personality traits, is a great place for me to be because I'm very strong at relationship management and I'm very strong at execution. Those are my two sort of core strengths in my DNA. And then I ended up doing projects in financial services in '97 when we launched the Stock Exchange electronic trading platform, which was a brilliant project as well. And then I went into FS from there. So it had nothing to do with boarding school.
Yeah, okay, great. So that's a nice segue, and appreciate your honesty there. So you leave Loughborough and you join Accenture, obviously,
Yeah.
Dave, and I think this is why we get along so well, is because essentially what you've just said there is my pitch, right? That's exactly what we're strong and that's exactly what Imagine do, and that's your background, so it makes complete sense. So why Accenture, and just talk us through your journey there, because you spent 13 years there. It's quite a long time. I did,
and look, it was the best springboard. It was Anderson Consulting in the day.
Yeah.
With partners with Arthur Anderson back then, before the firm sort of divorced. But I mean, honestly, the truth, so I actually got funded to do a master's at Loughborough, and it was fully funded back in those wonderful days where they not only paid the education, but in this case, they paid the living expenses. So I did another year. So I did a master's in IT, which sounds terribly glamorous, but it was actually a conversion course in those days, i.e. teaching technology to people who'd never studied technology before. So it sounded a lot more impressive than it was. But anyway, as a result, when I came out of there, I applied to Accenture, partly because it was one of the best jobs and the best paid jobs, on the street in those days. And I applied to the technology division, and the honest truth is I thought, well, it'll all be boys and they won't have any girls. And I was absolutely 100% correct. And therefore, my theory was I would have more chance of, being accepted. And that's exactly what happened. And as it turns out, because I don't know, maybe I just have those weird logic traits in my head because I like maths and further maths and physics and weird stuff like that. Actually coding, which Accenture teaches you to do from the beginning, and loads of people drop out at that stage because they're just like, this is not for me, I hate it. I was a bit weird and just loved it. And so I actually joined their technology division, and then we eventually became market aligned later, which is when I ended up in financial services. But to begin with, it was kind of capability driven, and that's how I ended up there, basically.
I suppose there's a couple of key learns there. One thing that I was always taught from the early stages of my career was that if everybody's going in one direction, head in the other.
Yeah, true.
Because there's no way, the world as we know it now, it revolves around niche businesses and niche offerings. And you can only become an expert in what you do if you're niche. And therefore, that was the mindset. And you've kind of done the same thing, right? If you think there's no girls in there, and that's actually going to be a real commercial light bulb for you in your career, let's go into that. And
it definitely worked. It definitely worked. I can't prove the fact that was why they took me on. The masters would definitely have helped, actually, because I had another tick, on my CV in those days. But I don't know whether I knew that it was going to suit me from a personality perspective, but it absolutely did. I loved it. As I say, we all, you get parceled off to St. Charles for I don't know whether they still go now, but I don't know, 2-3 weeks to just code, code. So it's pretty intense, and you do long days. But I really enjoyed
somewhere.
It. So in a basement somewhere. That's right. They had good ice cream though, very good ice cream machine. I remember that. That's all I remember really.
Good. Okay, so you do a project at the London Stock Exchange, and that's your first experience in the FS world.
Yeah.
What fascinated you about it? What made you, at this point, did you think, okay, this is the sector for me, or what was the next steps? What was the next thought process?
I think I was quite flexible about what sector I was in because of where I started with Accenture. I'd worked in telecoms, I'd worked in all sorts of different industries. The employment department in Runcorn was another highlight of my career. Walking through picket lines and things, which I'll never forget. Some of those, all in our smart London suits. With it was just horrendous. But I didn't really mind about the sector. The project at the Stock Exchange was very cool because basically we had to get the entire market ready to go electronic. And I worked on a piece of that called Market Readiness, which meant we were dealing with all the broker dealers and all the small organisations, right up to the big organisations, going, "Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Because we're going to turn it on." And I remember the day we launched it, we had a lunch with the CEO of the Stock Exchange back in those days, and I don't even know how this came up, but we had a bet with him that when he went onto the TV to announce the launch of I don't even whether you remember or whether it was the news, I think it probably was, we bet him that he couldn't get the words truculent badger into the interview. And it was very funny because he actually did it. He said the markets have been behaving like a truculent badger recently, and we were just all like, oh my God, he actually did it. But it was one of those projects where it was a very big, broad impact. and we were focused on quite a small but very important people-related activity about the readiness of everybody to go live. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose I just fell into financial services, honestly, and I've just stayed there ever since. But whether it's by design, I mean, I have no issue with working in a different sector even now. And in fact, you know, I think about that quite often. You can go and do what I do in many different sectors. So it's not that I have to stay in FS. I just happen to have been here for quite a long time.
No, exactly. And if you think about what you do with the leadership aspect, the transformation, the change, and it being project-based, it's suited to any sector. Right?
Yeah.
That's what's great about change consultancy, isn't it?
It is.
That you can, you know, you need some SME knowledge naturally, and you can have, you know, a blended project team where you have that SME knowledge in there, but then you can go and apply the principles to any sector, which is good.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so then we moved to HSBC.
Yeah. Well, I quit in a flurry of. I've done 13 years and I'm leaving. You know, it was a very dramatic sort of exit from Accenture, which was, you know, it was just time. I'd had a long time there. And I think I have some kind of itch around that level, which I shouldn't really say, because obviously I've been at HSBC for 16 years. But anyway, I think where I'm in an organisation for that long, but I'm doing lots of different jobs, it doesn't feel like one job. And it's the same here. I've done 4 or 5 massive different roles. And because it's such a big place, every time you move, it's like a new job, but you just happen to be in the same organisation. So it was time to move on. And actually, HSBC was my client. So in those days, it wasn't quite as controlled and crazy as it is now. I mean, Accenture were not happy that I moved to the client, but ultimately I'd resigned. So they waived the competition side of things and to maintain the relationship. And I joined actually the guy that I was already working for as a consultant. So he had an absolute result, because overnight I became a lot cheaper, even with a bonus. And I just moved, you know, doing the same role. So I literally quit on the Wednesday and he was like, you know, do you want a job? And I was like, sure. And then by the Monday, here I was. So it was a strange transition, actually. And then, you know, I moved through various different parts of the organisation, and I've been really fortunate to do some very interesting and exciting things whilst I've been here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, your profile speaks for itself. It's great. And two projects I really want to go and dive deeper into is the prime services. You know, setting up that business from scratch is not something that a lot of people in an organisation the size of HSBC get to do. So tell us about that. It looks great. Yeah,
I mean, look, that was a fascinating time. I was given, to be precise, $79.4 million. Don't ask me where that number came from or why it was so specific, to go and build this business. The guy who was appointed to be head of the business, an amazing human being called Kim Burke, who was my then boss, me and his assistant, that was it. That was the team. And I had this huge bag of money. And actually, this is really ironic timing, because this evening I'm meeting up with, I was going to say the boys, the prime boys, but the truth is they are mostly boys, nearly all of them actually, for drinks. And so that was 2009, and we have been great friends and a very, very close-knit group since then, so a very long time.
Sounds like an Amazon documentary, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The Prime Boys.
I'm quite glad you're not interviewing me tomorrow, actually. I need to kind of make sure I'm watching how much alcohol goes down everybody's necks this evening. But so anyway, we built this business from nothing, and it was kind of utterly greenfield, which, as you say, is virtually never happens in this type of organisation. But, you know, we had the custody and fund admin business, we had the equity trading business, and the two were not connected at all.
Yeah.
And some clients quite like that. Actually, they didn't really want them to be connected. And then other clients were going, well, you know, I'd like to be able to use my custody and fund admin assets to, you know, to offset against my trading activity. So we built the business both in the UK and in Asia, in Hong Kong. So it was the first time I'd really done any big travelling with HSBC. But I spent those 3 to 4 years basically travelling between here and Hong Kong and suffering violent jet lag. But we built the team from nothing. You know, we handpicked every single member of that team. And it was, you know, it was really hard work, but it was incredibly rewarding. And we took it live, and actually the business took quite a long time to, you know, get the client activity side of things going. But yeah, it's still running now, very successful business. So it was cool. It was a very, very, very cool project. Probably one of the best. You picked one of the best 2 that I've done. Let's see if you get the second one right.
Let's stay on that, because I think there's some things we can draw out of that. First and foremost, obviously, the next generation of leaders coming through, like,
Yeah.
how did you get that role? How did you put yourself in a position to be seen and to be thought of as, this is the lady for us?
Well, interestingly, there's an interesting story to that. So originally, my boss who'd hired me into the bank was the guy who was appointed to build the business, Kian, who I mentioned. So, and he knew that I was an expert in change management. Therefore, of course, he was going to have me on the team to help build the business. But at the time, they were going to go out into the market and hire some big, impressive individual whose name will remain anonymous for the purposes of this conversation. And I was sort of going, okay, fine, they're going to go and get this big guy to do this. And to be fair to your point about being an SME, I was absolutely not an SME in prime services. But what I did do was go out and hire a design authority who absolutely knew about prime services, because we didn't have the experience in the bank because we didn't have that business. So we had to buy that in. But in time, what actually happened was, and it was fate rather than anything else, they didn't hire this individual, the external. I was kind of saying, give me 10% of his salary and I'll do it. Didn't work either, but I tried. And then what happened is, because I was doing it interim, Kian ended up going, oh, do you know what, just run it, because I was already running it. So actually my lesson there to anybody else is, and I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never done it before. It was slightly scary in some ways, but I just got on with it. And I just went, oh, well, we'll give it a try. And actually that has been a pattern through my whole career. Then the other project that we may talk about in a moment was exactly the same, where my going in position was, I have no idea what it's going to take to do this.
Yeah.
But if it's doable, I will do it for you. And if it's not, I won't, but I'll give it a try. And actually that is probably what happened in this case. And then Kian started realizing that actually I was running it anyway and it was going pretty well. But I was literally making it up as I went along in many ways, but also intelligently buying in the skill sets that I knew I didn't have and that we needed. Obviously with his help, I didn't do it on my own. We did it together. But yeah, that's how I did it. I just put myself out there and said, let's give it a try. That's how it happened.
I think that's a really key point, right? A lot of people will be so risk averse that they might not put their neck on the line to do something like that. So I suppose that's a key point. The other key point is that you mentioned there is, like, how do you make that assessment? You said, I'll give it a go, and if it's not going well, then well, fine.
Martin.
When and how do you make that assessment? Because you actually don't know.
And as I say, the other initiative that we'll talk about is a good example of that, where it took twice as long and twice as much money and all of that good stuff. I think some of that's around the boring old language of governance, where you've got, it's not just me going, is it okay or is it not okay? There's a group of relatively like-minded, intelligent, senior people who are properly sponsoring and engaged with and in that initiative. So in this case, it was between the markets business, the HSS business, and then up into the global banking and markets leadership team. And they were all overseeing what we were doing and deciding whether it was going okay or not. And actually, we did do it within the budget.
How often do
they
month. Decide? Every month you decide whether
every
it's
month
going okay?
Without fail. I mean, in the agile ways of operating, that's a bit waterfall, and we would probably do it in a different way. But I think when you've got an initiative of that magnitude, and even in those days, we were using agile ways of operating, but we had a plan. You have to have a plan if you're broad brush, of an initiative that big, partly because you have to go and ask for the funding, right? You can't just roll and roll and roll and roll and roll. So for me, I'm a bit of a passionate advocate of having enough of a plan to give you enough of an idea, and it'll be a guesstimate, to be honest, and then, rolling in between. But yeah, the governance was critical because we made the decisions together and actively about whether we were going the right way or not.
And then looking at your, part of your forte is your people management and your leadership expertise. Talk me through the challenges and the leadership skills that you used when managing up at those checkpoints.
Yeah, I mean, so relationship management is at the key of leadership for me. So you have to be good at relationship management with the seniors, the peers, and the juniors. It's very simple, and this is why I'm a passionate advocate of things like 360-degree feedback, by the way. A, because it drives the right behaviours, because it makes people care about everybody, top and bottom, because they all have a say. And B, because actually, if you're going to be a leader, you have to be able to manage all three levels of relationship. Now, in this case, I handpicked the team. I was ruthless about those that weren't performing. And by the way, there's a wonderful speech on TED Talks about super chickens that I would seriously recommend everybody look up and listen to, because it's fascinating. And what it basically says is having a team of all super chickens, i.e. everybody absolutely brilliant, is not a good idea. Mm-hmm. They maul each other to death and it doesn't actually work. You need some super chickens, some mediocre, some not so brilliant ones, right? So when I say I was ruthless about it, I was ruthless about both tolerance of diversity of talent, skill, background and everything else, but also making difficult decisions. And I had to make a couple that, again, I won't be specific about, taking out some pretty big senior people who were going to cause me pain by removing them, but they had to be removed for good reason. And you need to make those decisions as well. So for me, it was a balance of both things. And then obviously, in addition, inspiring the team to work exceptionally hard to deliver the outcomes. And that comes back to my leadership point, which is if they choose to follow you, they'll work really hard, actually. Yeah. If they don't like you, they'll do the minimum and they will get paid and then they'll go home. If they like and are inspired by you and they trust and respect you, those are the three things for me that are important in a leader, and it's what I look for in people who I work for, then that's the nirvana position, and they will work over and above what is asked of them to deliver. And that was one of the things that we absolutely had in that team, and I think I've had in most teams that I've worked with, to be honest.
Yeah, the super chickens is classic Alex Ferguson as well, isn't it? With
yes, very similar.
Not having a team of superstars. You need your Darren Fletchers, your Phil Nevilles, and so on. Hey,
hang on, you're talking about, I'm a girl. Ultimately, I am still a girl, and now I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I know who Alex Ferguson is, but that's about it.
But it's about that, right? You can have your superstar, but you need your superstars have got to work extremely hard as well, which is crucial to an effective team. But then it's also having the non-superstars that work hard, that keep the rest of the guys grounded.
Well, they come with different skill sets. That's the point, right? And if you watch the TED Talk, it's actually a proper experiment that was done genuinely with chickens, and it's fascinating. And it's about the fact that the mixed ability flock, over however many years they did it, 4 years, I can't remember what she said. The lady actually came here to do a talk with the COO community, and it was brilliant. She was a bit, eccentric, but it was an awesome talk about the fact that the mixed ability flock over the years did a lot better than the super chicken flock, which had all the biggest, most impressive chickens. So anyway, it's worth watching. It's just an interesting leadership lesson, I think.
Absolutely. And the two areas where you needed to be ruthless and remove people from the program, I'm obviously not going to go into details, but was that because of a skill issue, or was that because of a messaging or approach disagreement?
One of them was just some activity that was going on that was just not acceptable from the perspective of the rules and regulations of working here. The other ones were sometimes kind of changing the dynamic of the team, but not in a healthy way. So it's quite good to have different people, but there are sometimes people who just don't gel with the generic way that the team was operating. So it was a bit of both of those two things, to be honest.
So I always find that really fascinating, and I think it's a big call when you've got somebody with all the ability in the world, but actually it's a gel or it's a team mix issue. Then it takes real guts to actually remove that.
It does, especially when it causes a pain, as it did with me, and I ended up kind of catching everything. But the decision was fixed within weeks, and indeed 3 or 4 weeks later we looked back and we went, oh my God, it's so much better. So it was scary at the time. It was kind of like, God, is this the right or wrong thing to do? I mean, for me, there was no choice. It was an absolutely clear decision that had to be taken. Kian was not so sure. We had a very robust conversation of the kind of, on your head be it if this goes wrong.
Yeah, I can imagine the call.
You can imagine. And then a few weeks later, he was like, do you know what, George, that was 1,000,000% the right thing to do, and I'm actually really impressed that you made that call. So I think sometimes you can't be everybody's best friend. You do have to sometimes make the tough decisions. But it was a gut feel thing, Martin, to be honest. I can't explain it more than that.
No, and I think that also plays a big part in leadership, isn't it? And it's often seen as a bit of a cop-out or a bit of a, you struggle to explain it. But I think Simon Senyek explains it really well about the gut feeling, and it's that feeling because it's that part in your brain that
brain cells in your tummy, it turns out, in your heart, in your head, a lot in your head obviously, and then in your stomach. So it is actually a thing.
Completely. Okay, so the next big one then is the The HR transformation.
You got it right.
Talk about that one, right?
Yeah, you got it right.
So that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, look, the best way that I can describe that program is it was the biggest achievement of my career, bar none. Once again, I went in with absolutely no idea what I was taking on, and the attitude of, well, I'll give it a go. And actually, to be fair, to be absolutely brutally honest, my then boss, an amazing, inspirational, incredible man called Pierre Goethe, who's recently retired from the organisation, but he was the group head of comms for many, many years, and then he became head of HR for a period. And in fact, I was wooed by his literal begging for me to come and join him. And it sounds ridiculous, but actually somebody valuing you at that level and saying you're the only person in the bank who can do this. And I was like, oh, wow, nobody ever says that to you. And so, joking aside, though, it was a very, very important thing, because what that told me was I had his full support and sponsorship. There was not an ounce of him that was questioning whether I was the right person or not. And therefore, I came in on all the right footings, knowing that, you know, I'd give it, and that's what I said to him. I literally said to him on level 42 in the bank here, you know, I will give it my all. If it's possible to do it, I will do it, but I really don't know whether we're going to be able to do it or not. And there were two elements to it. One was basically transforming the whole HR function, which was the really big bit. And the other bit was building the HSBC University. And at the time he said, which do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to build the university because that sounds really cool. And I can fly around the world and build huge buildings, you know, with glamorous gold turrets all over the place. And obviously that didn't come to fruition, but we did build the university. And I said to him, just give me both and I'll sort it out for you. And he was like, oh, well, I thought this was two roles, but okay, if you take it on, I'll give you both. So I hired somebody to run the university program for me, and we did he did an amazing job of that with very little input from me. An amazing guy called Yogesh Khanna, who still works for me now. And I focused on the transformation of HR, and that was crazy, right? So in the day, my lovely friends and colleagues at Accenture told me it would take 18 months and a very large number, which I'm not going to give you, to deliver it. And I said, you can't do anything in HSBC. The whole bank everywhere in the world, 66 countries and territories and 285,000 staff in a year and a half. You can't do it. I don't know what it is, but you can't do it. And this was taking the entire HR platform into the cloud with SAP and SuccessFactors. And, you know, it'd never been done before. So big like BAE and other American Airlines and people like that, they, you know, used SAP and used the cloud and so on, but never at this magnitude. And we did it big bang, which was genuinely the scariest day of my life. And I remember having a very, very brutal conversation with the then group COO, Andy Maguire, saying to him, Andy, I'm just warning you that if this goes wrong, I will close the bank, I will shut every building, I will close all the trading systems down, because whilst it is only the HR platform, it feeds everything. So everywhere that we need to know who you are, where you're allowed to go, what you're allowed to do, it starts with the HR system. So it's where the data is fed to that is so dangerous. So that was the bit that was very
all
scary.
Security systems as well, right?
Yes, well, all of that, hence closing all the buildings, right? So I was just like, oh my God. And we stayed up that night till 4 a.m, and I was so scared. But the project, the testing alone took 18 months. Mm-hmm. So this 18 months thing actually took 4.5 years. And it was a very difficult thing because I was mauled to death many times about overspending, too much time. But we were halfway there, and it was kind of like, okay, you can throw it away, but we're literally going to throw the money away.
Yeah, you can't turn the lights off with that sort of program. Well,
we could have done, but we got nothing for it. So we got nothing for 50% of the money. So to be fair to the organisation, they kept going. I mean, SAP did ask me to never explain to anybody how much it cost, because it was an obscene amount of money that we ended up having to spend. And I think that even they were horrified. But what I tried to explain to them was, when you pull out core infrastructure for the whole bank in a place like this, it's really expensive and really complicated and very difficult. However, now we have this amazing system that upgrades 4 times a year. In fact, it upgrades more than we can really keep up with. The innovation is absolutely incredible, and the running costs of it are negligible. So if you forget the investment, which was very painful, so the ROI wouldn't be very good. I mean, it was the biggest achievement of my career. I'm not entirely sure I want to do it again, but it was amazing. Amazing.
However, I'll give you opportunity to redeem that last sentence, because you are a consultant at heart. So the ROI eventually will be good, right? It just might take.
Of course, it will eventually. Yeah. No, I mean, we did, joking aside, we did a massive amount of simplification. The amount of policies we simplified, the amount of time we have saved, the amount we've been able to reduce the HR function or get it to focus on what it should be focusing on, not on all the horrendous administrative rubbish that it used to have to do before. All of those things, which are not necessarily dollar related, were huge in terms of transformation. Yeah.
So how many people did you bring in? Did you bring in third parties? Obviously,
all of the above.
How did it all work? Talk me through it.
So Accenture were the SI, the systems integrator. We had a team of about 500 globally in the end working on it. We had change and implementation people virtually in every centre around the world. Yeah, because we had to work with the whole bank, right? Because it affected every single employee and line manager in the group. So we have 35,000 line managers and 285,000 employees. So it's affecting a lot of people. So the change element of this was huge, let alone the technology side of things that I've just touched on. So yeah, I mean, it was the biggest thing I've ever done, and the team were amazing, and I never gave up on it. I was asked to move a few times into different roles, and it was really weird. It was so my baby, and I was so determined. Everybody told me we couldn't do it. And I've got some weird part of my DNA that if you tell me I can't do something, then I go, right, come on. As sure as eggs is eggs, by the way, if you start off something saying we can't do it, you won't do it. Very simple. If you believe in it, then there's always a way. It may take longer, it may cost more money, but there is always a way, particularly if the human beings working on it genuinely believe they can do it. And the team believed it. So, yeah, we did really well.
Exactly, and that obviously comes back to your, part of your triangle is the inspiration aspect, right? So you need to inspire people that it can be done, and it's what we see in everyday life in every sector, isn't it? If people believe it can be done, then it can be achieved. If they
You're absolutely right. Yeah,
you're doing you not what in the wind.
What I did, which was a really weird thing, and I remember where it came from actually, and it became the absolute bane of my life. But every single Friday, I was to be found sitting at my laptop till horribly late in the evening, consolidating something that became known as the Superstars email, and it was asking everybody on the team, technology and the business teams, to call, and ops and everybody else, to call each other out for doing amazing work. So we started off with this, am I allowed to contribute because I'm from technology? Yes, of course you are. I don't care where you're from. If you want to call a colleague out. And it was just a little email, send me a sentence or two, what they've done and why you think they're a superstar. And then we had a few people in the team say, well, I think we should be selective about it. No, this is my letter. It's got nothing to do with us selecting who the superstars are. If somebody wants to call somebody else out, we should let them do that. And it became, and I used to drag all these inspirational quotes off the internet and paste them into the email and all this stuff. But it became a really ridiculously important tool that everybody waited for. And they loved it because I used everyone's exact wording, good English, bad English, wherever, whatever it was. And it was just cut and pasted. So as I say, it became an administrative nightmare. But it was loved, that email. Sometimes we had 40 to 50 call outs a week.
Wow. Just
from people saying this person's done. And otherwise you would never hear about the fact that person, and everyone used to read it religiously, and it was a really small thing, but it had a huge impact in terms of people's motivation, actually.
Exactly, and motivations are different, especially within different kinds of people in different sectors and different domains. So the fact that people are given that platform and can receive that recognition is great. Yeah, it's very underestimated. Thank you and/or recognition is so valuable to everybody. I don't care what level of seniority you are, by the way. Yeah, completely. I mean, obviously, when COVID hit, we adopted our processes like most businesses, and we tried to be. We're a collaborative organisation anyway. We have to be by nature of running projects, right? But we adopted them to throw Zoom parties, Zoom drinks every Friday, and we still carried it on now to this day that every Friday we do wins of the week. So everyone jumps on a Zoom call, and everyone gives us what their win of the week is. So we get to understand and hear across all departments. So from finance to HR exactly, and like what they call it out themselves, and actually it's part of improving public speaking and improving,
yes,
not being so British about, being proud of your achievements and so on. So
yeah,
yes,
no, true, very true. I think we spend so much time, either people being worried about being told off. I had this exact conversation with someone this morning, or being, fearful of getting it wrong. And it's like, especially in the new world of, well, it's not really a new world of Agile, is it? But anyway, in the world of Agile, we've got to allow people to try and fail. Otherwise, they'll never try, is the long and short of it, actually. And in this case, those people, I was finished by the time we'd finished this project. It was such a long time and it was intense the whole way through. But the whole team was. And yet you ask pretty much anyone who worked on that team, and I can almost guarantee they'll tell you the same story as me, in that it was horrendous in so many ways, but amazing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
If you've got that one common goal, that common drive, and you finish something and you see it.
You finished it, exactly. And it was successful. I just cannot believe that it was so successful. But yeah,
it's like having kids.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's a bloody nightmare, but everyone tells you it's great.
yeah, but you'd never go back, you see.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great photo, actually, that I need to show you at some point, that we took on the floor on the day after we went live. We drank 56 bottles of Prosecco. My boss was a bit horrified, and I was like, there were 150 of us or whatever it was. And I was like, keep bringing them out. And we had such a fantastic day of celebrating because we'd actually done it, So it was amazing. You don't get that feeling ever again, probably.
Oh, yeah. Good. Okay, so right now you're obviously running the transformation aspect for the private bank.
Yeah.
Quick summary on that, how that's going, and then what does the future hold for you?
So look, it's a very similar job to the job I did in Global Banking Markets. I'm running the portfolio of change. The new bit for me is running the digital side of things. So I took that on earlier this year, and I'm fascinated about the journey that all of our businesses are now trying to make into the world of digital. It's become much more embedded within the whole sort of infrastructure. Digital at HSBC for a while was sitting off to one side, and now it's very much more embedded within the overall story of the business. And actually, weirdly, we all know this, but COVID has really sped up that agenda, right? Because everybody had to go pretty digital, even if they didn't want to. Even those of different generations who are determined and want to go to the branch actually started to not be able to. So in a way, it's forced the digital revolution to speed up. So that bit's really fascinating for me. It's a fascinating business. The private banking and wealth business is a very, very, very dynamic business. It's a business that is growing, particularly in Asia. So, and actually for us, it's a tiny little business in HSBC in terms of the number of people in the business. But actually, the breadth of the products that we cover and the services that we offer and the types of client that we deal with, of course, they are, the ultra high net worth and the high net worth individuals. Their demands about what they need in terms of service from a bank are very high. And the really interesting part as well is it's very, very relationship management driven, right? So a lot of these clients want to have very personal service provided to them. So it's a great place for me to work. I've loved moving to a different business. I didn't want to go back to a business that I'd worked in before. Another of my mantras is always to go forward, right?
Nice, yeah.
What's next? Don't know. There's always things going on in this organisation. It might be this organisation, might be another organisation. I'm a very because I'm a change person, I like change myself, actually. I'm not scared of it. And actually, I think it's quite important to keep moving, which is why I'll never go back. Personally, I'll never go back. I keep going forward into something else. Partly because I want to learn, right? And one of my biggest self-reflections, I've been working with a transition coach recently, who sort of helps you think outside the box, is I've done change for 28 years. Yeah. And as our lovely ex-CEO once said to me, well, you must be pretty good at it by now. And I said, well, I hope I am. And actually, it turns out with my personality profile, change is a very good thing for me to do because, as I said to you, my two deep skills are relationship management and execution. So that works well by accident, maybe rather than design. But anyway, I would quite like to do something a bit different, something where I'm not just continually running transformation, because you get to a point where you've done it for so long that actually it would be quite nice selfishly for me to learn a new skill. But I don't know when, Martin. At some point, I'm sure something will change. I'm a firm believer in the universe, so I think she has a big say in what's going to happen in everyone's lives.
Absolutely. What interests you then? What?
I'd like to, ultimately, I'd very much like to do a COO role. I think it's quite a natural transition from what I do. So a COO runs, controls and changes the organisation. Doesn't matter what industry, what level of COO, it's always the same. Change has become a bigger and bigger part of that agenda. So even back in my global banking and market days, what I did became a lot more of what the COO's job was, less. I mean, obviously the running and controlling needs to happen anyway, but the change became very, very much part of the conversation. No longer discretionary, particularly in our industry around regulatory change, where it's mandatory that we have to do this stuff. So yeah, I'd like to do something in the COO space. I'm very interested in, operations, things like that, which I haven't done before, running big teams of people. I love running big teams of people. So yeah, I'm always out and looking and talking to lots of different people. And I think the networking is the way that your life and your career changes. Completely. So if you sit too focused down and in, then you never look out. And actually you must look out. It's more interesting anyway to just look out now and again. Some people are absolutely brilliant at it. I wouldn't say I'm brilliant at it, but because I'm quite, get the job done, focus on that. Yeah. But I think, keeping your eye up and out and your relationships up and out is mission critical.
It's a great piece of advice to anyone coming through, whether you're an aspiring leader or a current MD or business owner, right? Yeah. A lot of, especially in the SME world, you can't see the wood for the trees because you're doing the job.
One lady, amazing lady who runs the mental health, I'm a passionate mental health advocate, but a mental health first aid organisation in London once said to me, there's a difference between networking, because I hate just going and turning up to a networking event and going, hello, it's not my thing. But what she said was, when you are networking with a purpose, it's completely different. And I thought that was really insightful, because actually, if you're networking around an actual purpose, then it's completely different from just turning up at random networking events and just networking for the sake of networking. So I thought that was quite an interesting angle on it as well.
Completely. Right. Now's my favourite part, George. This is the quick fire questions.
Good job, because we are almost out of time and I am being rung by my next meeting. But go on then, quick fire questions. Ask me.
What's your favourite source of information, book or podcast or anything? Where do you learn from?
I love things around leadership, funnily enough. I love things around self-development. I've learned a lot recently about self-compassion, which is something that people have talked to me about and I've never really understood. Listening, weirdly, something I've had criticised for my entire career and didn't really understand what it meant, and then suddenly I started to understand. So I read, there's a wonderful book called Quiet, which is an amazing book about, introverts. I'm clearly not an introvert, but, what the power of the introvert in a very noisy world. So things like that. I love that kind of thing.
Okay, good. Three pieces of advice you would give your younger self.
Don't worry too much about taking risks. Make sure they are calculated. Have fun. Work to live. Don't live to work.
Nice. Okay. And finally, who's your role model and why?
I had to do this with my transition coach, and I had quite a few. Oh God, I have so many. It's a very difficult one, that. I suppose people like Gandhi and people who work and talk about and act in the world of the kind of Buddhist teachings are people who I find utterly inspirational, because I love the concept that the world is a place where human beings could really do to be kinder to each other and to look after each other more. I think we have a really nasty propensity in many parts of our DNA to compete and, not treat each other with respect. And it's so easy to do, and it is so valuable that I follow somebody on Facebook called Little Buddha, and they have very, very inspirational sort of, quotes and things, which I love. So for me, it's those kind of people that are trying. It's not some world peace thing, but I just wish that humans were able to be, kinder to one another. I think we get a lot further.
Nice, brilliant. Okay, George, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've loved
it. Thanks, Martin. I'm glad we managed to do it in the end. It took us long enough to organise.
Absolutely. And there's loads of stuff we didn't talk about. So come on the next series and we can dive deeper.
No problem. Well, now I know what I'm up for. But thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely, yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
See you
If
soon.
anyone is listening and wants to pick your brains, obviously they can reach out to you on LinkedIn and so
Please
on.
do, yep. I'm hopeless on LinkedIn, but I will do my best. But yes, no problem, of course.
Great stuff. And to the listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've enjoyed it, then obviously please share and pass the pod, but don't tell Crouchy's legal team I said that. Brilliant.
Thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
George.
Nice to see you. Thanks.